Hi, this tutorial is brought to you by pm-prep35.com. We are an online PMP training website. Do visit pm-prep35.com to find a lot of free resources in terms of mock exams, chapter tests, and tutorials. In this session, I'm going to cover close project or phase process, which is part of project integration management knowledge area, and it is one of the two processes in closing process group. The other process is closed procurements, which falls in project procurement management knowledge area. So, in this session, I'm just going to cover the closed project or phase. As the name goes, the closed project or phase not only deals with project closure but also phase closure. So, although there is a validate scope process, the validate scope which falls in project scope management knowledge area, it deals with formalizing the acceptance of the deliverables. This process, close project or phase, it deals with formalizing the closure process. You're more concerned about closure, archival, and ensuring the final product is accepted, while in case of the validate scope, you're formalizing the acceptance of the um, uh, final product. So in case of validate scope, you're getting closer to closure, but in case of close project or phase, you're ensuring that closure is complete in terms of archiving and releasing resources to the next project, or making the product ready for operations, transferring knowledge to the concerned team, and all that becomes part of this particular process. With that idea, we'll just go through the important points that's part of close project or phase process. The close project or phase process is concerned with the formal closure of the project or phase, documenting lessons learned and archiving artifacts or important aspects of this process. So, as part of closure, you're more concerned with ensuring that all documentation or um, pushed to the knowledge base, or which is part of the organization process asset, so that it's useful for future projects. Closure can happen, and in fact should happen, when the project is terminated. In that case, whatever interim deliverables you have completed or whatever phases you have completed, the documentation with regard to that and the interim deliverables, they get archived. Archived means you are storing it to a common place which is useful for other people in the organization. In future projects, they can refer to this historical information in this project, and they can gain some lessons learned while they do planning for the next project. So this process deals with documenting lessons learned and archiving artifacts as important aspects of this particular process. So once, if there is a project that gets terminated, um, the project manager sits with the stakeholders. The stakeholders can be in the form of the project team or the customer mainly, to get feedback about their work done so far. He gains the feedback from the customer, and he ensures that this particular document is archived, so that in future, when some other team or some other project manager wants to look at any experience with this concerned client, he should be able to retrieve this particular document and he can perform better with that particular client. So that's one of the reasons why you collect feedback or you document lessons learned. As part of this process, the project team will transfer knowledge to the operations team. So this is another aspect. You not only get feedback from the customer, or you document lessons learned in terms of any other best practices you follow, but you also ensure that you transfer knowledge to the operations team. So this is in case of the project success. You have a product developed and you have to tell the operations team about any process they have to follow, what is that is the expectation and things like that, or how to use the product. So that's part of transferring knowledge to the operations team. So the product has a life cycle wherein it gets developed through the project life cycle, then it becomes a product, and then it becomes operational. So operations and project development or project life cycle integrate together when you think of product life cycle, it has both a project life cycle from inception to building or final product is ready, and then it becomes operational. The organizational process assets get enriched because of newly acquired knowledge transfer document or assets in the form of reusable components. I might have created some components which can be useful for other projects. I might have created some documentation which can be useful, some best practices. Those get archived in the knowledge base, which is the organization, which is part of organizational process asset. So here, when you look at enterprise environment factors and organizational process assets, you can easily make out that the organizational process assets are more related to process guidelines, best practices and all that, but your enterprise environmental factors are more like constraints which are mandated by someone, which you have no other go, you have no way to escape to follow, to bring that into your project planning or the way you do the project. So the main inputs for this particular process or the project management plan, while it plans for all the knowledge areas, so it tailors each and every process, and what are the process you are going to follow for the particular project will have an entry in the project management plan. As part of that, you'll have even some details about this process where you say how will you do the closure activities, what is the feedback form that you'll take from the customer, what other aspects that you will do as part of closure. Those things are all documented in the project management plan. You need to remember that in case of validate scope, you will ensure that you get formal acceptance, and at that point you will cross check with the requirement documentation, where you are ensuring that the scope has been covered. So the scope that was promised to the customer is covered, but in case of closed project or phase, you are more concerned about following processes towards closure. So that's why PM plan, project management plan, is an input here, and requirement documentation doesn't need to be a input here. It is input for the validate scope process. Then the second input is accepted deliverables. The accepted deliverables are an output of validate scope process. The client has already reviewed, seen how how the deliverable works, and is happy with the final product. And he's also, I mean, if there is any phase-wise deliverables, those are also checked and they are ensured that they are in good shape. And this becomes a step to just do the documentation and get a sign off in this particular process for formal closure. So accepted deliverables is an input to this process. It's a proof that this project is ready to be closed. So that's why as part of validate scope, you ensure that the formalization of acceptance is done, but in this case you formalize the closure process by proper archival, documenting lessons learned, releasing resources and all that. Organizational process assets is the next input, wherein you get the templates for closure. So templates for closure come from organizational process assets. If you see, the enterprise environmental factors will be inputs for mainly the planning processes, because that's where you have to factor in what are the external factors that will affect the project. But as you go down the line, you would not be concentrating too much on the enterprise environmental factors, or in other words, your planning will have a lot of inputs coming from enterprise environmental factors, because you have to understand the organization culture, and you have to factor it in your plan. But then as you get to the executing process, until unless there is a mandate, you would not factor in enterprise environmental factors. So that's why your closing process does not have an entry or an input of enterprise environmental factor. Here you are not too much concerned about configuration management or work authorization. You're more concerned about archival, which becomes the role of organizational process asset or the knowledge base, or that's where you do all the archival. So you just have three inputs. One is the project management plan, then the accepted deliverables coming from validate scope process. Then you have organizational processes set, which is a constant input for all of the processes. So in this process, you use expert judgment. You might need a help of some other manager or um, where or external consultant in case of projects you're doing newly. You might want to know what would be useful for my future projects. So then you have meetings conducted as part of this phase with your as part of this process with your customer and different stakeholders. There might be a meeting to discuss what has been done really well in this particular project, getting feedback and all that, like a kickoff meeting that's done in planning process group. A closing process also will have the meetings as part of this process. Analytical techniques, wherein you analyze the current performance, how things can be better, you document that. So those also analytical techniques are also part of this particular process. So the outputs of this process is a final product, service or result transition, wherein you hand over it to the client or the operations team based on what you're going to do next. Then organizational process asset updates is where you document you push your lessons learned documentation, or if you have some components that you push that. If you are allowed to have the code, you push the code base to the process assets, which might be any tool that you use internally, which can be accessible to other projects in the same area. So that's about this particular process. Do visit pm-prep35.com to access a lot of free resources and other tutorials. Thank you.